The Buffalo Sabres are once again nowhere near playoff position in the Eastern Conference. That means that this year's trade deadline, they should be selling. This video, we're going to take a look at 5 players that the Buffalo Sabres should trade before the deadline this year. Let's go. Hey everybody! So with every passing week, we are getting closer and closer to the 2022 NHL trade deadline. We're now about 5 weeks away, and today we're going to be looking at another team that should be selling at the deadline, and that is the Buffalo Sabres. Now, I will say that Buffalo doesn't really have a whole lot to sell. It's not like last year where they had Taylor Hall or a big fish piece like that. But they do have some solid depth guys that I think should be moved before the deadline and will certainly garner some interest from teams looking to load up on depth around the league. So today we're going to look at 5 of those guys here for Buffalo that I really think should be moved at the deadline or have a chance to be moved at the deadline, that playoff teams are going to be looking to add for depth purposes. So let's get into it here. Let's get started. Right off the bat, number one name that jumps out to me is defenseman Colin Miller. Now, unfortunately, he is injured right now. He's been injured since late January. However, he is expected to be back before the trade deadline, and certainly could find himself on a new team after March 21st. He's 29 years old. He has 1 year left on his contract at $3.875 million. Obviously, Buffalo could very easily eat a little bit of money on that contract as well to move him, and it would only be for 1 year, so there'd be no long-term consequence of that. But Colin Miller is a really solid D-man that could come in and be a bottom pair guy on a playoff level team. I mean, he's certainly playing top 4 in Buffalo when he's healthy, but on a real good team, he's certainly going to be more of like a 5-6 type guy. But playoff teams are always looking to add defensive depth, and Colin Miller's a guy that's had some very solid years in the NHL. He's got some playoff experience. He was in Vegas for their cup run in 2018, so he brings a lot of depth and experience and really solid 5-6 D-man type capabilities to any team that decides to trade for him. And again, he'd be a 1-year rental for sure. He'll be a free agent at the end of this season, but there's certainly teams that will go out there and give up a draft pick or a prospect for a guy like Colin Miller. Cody Eakin, center, is a 30-year-old with 1 year left on his contract at $2.25 million per season. Again, Buffalo could eat money on this. They could retain salary if they needed to get a deal done. Only 1 year left on the contract. He's an upcoming free agent. Now, he only has 9 points this season. He's really not producing very much. However, if you're a team that's looking for center depth and you would only need him to play maybe like a fourth line role, then this could be a guy that you could end up, sending a mid-round pick to Buffalo for, because just to overall increase your center depth, which again, depth is so key come playoff time. We see this every year at the trade deadline. Teams that are going to the playoffs load up on these third, fourth line guys, bottom pair defensemen. They just try and get as much depth as they possibly can so that if somebody comes out of the lineup, they have reliable NHL caliber players to put into the lineup when somebody gets injured. And that's a big part of the trade deadline, and I think Cody Eakin is the kind of guy that a team looking for a bottom 6 forward just to get them some added center depth could add at the deadline at a fairly cheap price. Defenseman Robert Haig, another depth guy here, 27 years old, 1 year left on his deal, final year of his contract, pretty cheap salary at $1.6 million. And again, he's a bottom pair D-man. He could be a number 7 or 8 defenseman, depending on how, the new team's overall decor looks like. But again, just added depth here, 1 year rental player, pretty cheap price. And for Buffalo, there's really no sense in hanging on to a lot of these guys because they're probably going to be gone in the offseason anyway. So if you can get a mid-round draft pick, if you can get some sort of, 20-year-old prospect for any of these guys, then I think it's worth it for the Sabres, who are still very much a rebuilding team. And some of these guys in their late 20s or, in Eakins' case, early 30s, it doesn't really make sense for Buffalo to hold on to them. So I think there's a lot of moves that could possibly be made here. Another one is forward Vinny Hinostroza. Vinny Hinostroza, I probably should have put higher on this list because I think he's probably the second most valuable guy on this list behind Colin Miller as far as there being real interest in a guy like him at the trade deadline. He's 27 years old. He's got final year of his contract at just over $1 million. Very affordable deal for a lot of teams. And he brings quite a bit to the lineup. He's having a solid season in Buffalo. Unfortunately, he's out injured right now, but he is back practicing. So hopefully he'll be back sooner rather than later. Certainly should be back before the trade deadline. And Vinny Hinostroza is a speedy winger with some scoring ability, some offensive touch. He's got 8 goals this season, 17 points. This is exactly the kind of guy that teams going to the playoffs want to add to their bottom 6 before the postseason because he brings speed, he brings scoring ability. Secondary scoring is so huge going into the playoffs. And he's a guy that can add that and provide that in the lineup. So if you're a team that might be not quite deep enough up front, Hinostroza would be a great wing addition who can, chip in goals here and there, add a little bit of offense, and really just help improve your overall scoring depth on the team. And I think it's very, very likely that somebody goes for Vinny Hinostroza at the trade deadline this year. I think him and Colin Miller are the two most likely to actually be moved on this list. And then finally, John Hayden, another depth forward here, 27 years old, very, very cheap contract. 1 year left at $750K. I mean, this would just be a depth pickup. He probably wouldn't even be in the everyday lineup, but again, depth. How many years do we see guys like Nate Thompson, Brad Richardson, Trevor Lewis, Riley Sheahan, who I talked about in the Seattle video? Like, those kinds of fourth-line guys always are looked for at the trade deadline just to add overall team depth. He brings a little bit of grit to the lineup. He plays a hard sandpaper type game. He can drop the gloves every once in a while if he needs to. And he'll fit in a fourth line. He'll play a fourth line role, and could just be some added depth for a team that is gonna need it come playoff time. So, teams looking for toughness, fourth line type guy, maybe a little bit of added depth and sandpaper in the bottom of their lineup could very, very much be in on John Hayden. But overall, these are guys that, for the Buffalo Sabres, I think it would make sense to move. They are all pending free agents. There's no guarantee that any of them would be coming back to Buffalo anyway, so you might as well trade him. You might as well get what you can for him. For some of these guys, that might end up only being like a 5th or a 6th round pick. For some other of these guys, it might be a little bit better of a return than that, particularly Colin Miller. But overall, I think these are guys that could provide some sort of value, especially in the depth department, to teams that are going to the playoffs. And for Buffalo, it makes sense to move them so they at least get some sort of asset in return rather than just watching these guys leave in free agency at the end of the year. And it'll be interesting to see. Out of these 5 guys, I think the most likely to get traded is Colin Miller and Vinny Hinostroza. I think both of those guys do provide a good amount of value that teams are going to be looking for at the deadline. Robert Haig could also be a pretty decent depth D pickup. And then John Hayden's kind of that fourth line guy that we see traded a lot around deadline day. Again, kind of that Nate Thompson, Derek Grant, Riley Sheahan type fourth liner. Been around for a little while and just brings a little bit of sandpaper to the bottom of the lineup. Cody Eakin, I think, is probably the least likely to get moved just because I really don't think he has much value with how poor his offensive output has been. But again, a team looking for center depth could maybe make a move for him to come in and be their fourth line center. But all in all, everybody, the Buffalo Sabres should absolutely be selling at this year's deadline. And these are some guys on expiring contracts that I think it makes a lot of sense for them at least to get something back in return for, rather than just letting them go to free agency. And In particular, I think Colin Miller and Vinny Hinostroza would definitely have some value out there on the trade market. But we'll have to wait till around the deadline to see what happens. But I certainly would not be surprised if Buffalo is able to make some trades for at least a few of the guys on this list. So that's what I've got on the Buffalo Sabres. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our merchandise store, membership, and donation links are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys soon.